Hello, welcome back to this video, and today I'm going to talk about groupthink, and this is a continuation of the last video, in-group bias. Yes, they're independent videos, but this is like the chicken and the egg situation in the sense that it's very difficult for you to understand group or in-group bias without having a basic understanding on groupthink, and vice versa. It's very difficult for you to have a fully understanding on what groupthink is without understanding how that affects and how that has a practical application, in this case, the in-group bias. So I decided to start with the in-group bias because it's always easier to see how that plays out, meaning how sometimes we favor people that we interpret are part of our own group, and we actually ignore others or don't care that much about what we interpret others to be, and then try to understand the nitty-gritty behind the groupthink. But that's what we are going to cover today. And I'm going to try to cover a couple of things within the groupthink. The first, obviously, I'm going to try to explain what groupthink is. Then I'm going to give some reasons as of why we incur in groupthink. Then we're going to go to new problems that can make groupthink bias worse. Spoiler alert, we're going to discuss social media. And final one, as I always do, we're going to try to talk about possible solutions. So the first thing, as I always said, starting point is always good or better if we're going to start with a definition. But in this case, I'm actually going to start with an illustration of what groupthink can be, right? So the first thing that I think of when I think about groupthink, this idea keeps coming to my mind of this show. And there's a show called The Experiments, or there was a show called The Experiments, by a British magician and illusionist called Darren Brown. So if you don't know, he's a very famous and very internationally famous, popular magician that he focuses mostly on what you would call psychological magic rather than just the regular cards, although he does those as well. There's a feature, a series of social experiments around the limits of human behavior. So that is what the serious experiments are, or is about, or was in this case, because this was a couple of years ago. In one of the episodes called The Game Show, Darren Brown acts as a host of a fake show called The Game Show. Very simple. So like in his serious trick or treat, he had a different series in which it was very similar. He would contact or send requests for people or ask people that wanted to participate on the show, and then thousands of people will apply it. Sometimes not for themselves, but for someone a member of their family or a good friend. So the good thing about that is, like, even if you're applying, you never know exactly what the show is going to be about. You just know that if you're selected, you're going to be part of the Darren Brown show. So this is one of these cases in which people actually send requests for someone to be featured, but in this case, it would be, again, a family member or someone, a good friend of them. So in this case, the unsuspected protagonist of the show, of this one in particular, is surrounded by hidden cameras and actors. And of course, his friends, who will be all connected with Darren Brown at the studio. And in this case, Darren Brown, is at a studio with real public, like real people there. So the people are looking at the cameras, they're looking at a huge screen where they can follow what the cameras are doing, or the cameras that are following this unsuspected person, right? The interesting take on this particular show is that the people in the studio have their faces covered. That's the first clue that should start triggering you a little bit, with masquerade masks. So there's no chance that these people are going to be recognized at all. That's what they think. And that they, the public, get to choose what will happen to our main character, meaning the person that the cameras are following. The person doesn't know what's happening, doesn't even know that he's participating in anything at all. He's just going through his life. The only thing is that people around him are either actors or friends that know what's happening. And the people in the public, meaning the people who are in the studio, get to choose what happens to this character by just pressing a button. So they get to choose between something good or something bad. So at some point, Darren Brown would ask, all right, so for example, this guy is at a bar. Do you want this person now to flirt or get flirted by a woman, and then do you want this person to succeed, or you want this person to not succeed and a fake boyfriend would appear and try to threaten him? So again, a good thing and a bad thing. And people, again, can choose from their seats. Again, keep two things in mind. They're covering the phrases, and they can choose just by pressing a button where, again, no one else can, not even the person next to them, can see what's happening. Now, the first choices have mild consequences, but little by little, the choices become objectively more problematic. For example, the public chooses to get him fired, almost having a fight with someone at a bar. That's the case that I was defining before. Someone breaking into his house. But the worst comes at the end. The public chooses to get him kidnapped. Remember that you start with the lower kind of consequential things in which Darren Brown would say, okay, do you want this person now to be cursed by? And progressively, things getting worse and worse. The thing about this is that in between those questions, there will be some humor. And the other thing is that before they get to choose, they actually get a selection of answers that he has given to some questions. So the light in which this person has been pictured is actually not great. Not necessarily a really mean or bad person. He just looks normal, but the people who actually made this video to show to the public before any option or before anything had happened, they selected on purpose the things that made him look a little bit bad. Not, again, nothing crazy, but kind of like, like he didn't care so much about other people. He was kind of selfish. But again, keep in mind that all of this is a pre-selection. It's not that he necessarily thinks about those things. It's more of like they purposely cut those pieces together. So remember, that is information that the public has. And now he is encountered with situations in which the public gets to choose if he's going to have a good thing or a bad thing. And most of the time, unfortunately, they're choosing bad and worse and worse things. So in the final scene in which he's going to get kidnapped, the one that I was telling you about, in the final scene, you get to see how he manages to escape from a van, and he's running away. He starts running away. Now he gets accidentally hit by a car, and the camera shows how the actors are running towards him. Their work, and now the public can tell that this was not supposed to have happened. They're thinking, oh my God, like I didn't think that this was going to happen. Obviously, this is terrible. Like they're shocked. So don't worry. The cameras were strategically located so they would capture his running. But what happens is that when he moves and the camera moves towards the other side, it's actually a different person. It's an actor, it's a stunt person that actually does that last part. So he doesn't suffer at all. But the people who are in the public, the people who are there with Darren Brown, they think that something has happened. So at the end, Darren Brown actually confesses one thing, and that the show is not about what they thought or about whom they thought it would be about. It's not about that person. It was about the public that felt more and more comfortable to making bad decisions for someone else based on an idea that or a preconceived idea that they have been, or they have created themselves based on that video that they saw, and that progressively they felt less and less careful about their decisions because, again, it was kind of a joke. And since they also saw other people voting the same thing, because all of a sudden, like 70% people have opted for this person to suffer this little by little, they felt less and less bad about making those bad choices for another person. Now, what he was saying is that, again, that it was not about the people. It was not about this person itself. It was about the audience. Now, groupthink bias, and I'm going to give you a definition, is a bias for which a person's thoughts and decisions are made based on the thoughts and decisions of the group rather than their own individual thoughts. As a result, independent thinking is lost. Now, You might ask yourself, why do we incur in this groupthink? Well, there's an anthropological approach, and I always try to give you a psychological approach or an anthropological approach because I think that understanding why biases are produced is crucial for your understanding understanding of the biases. But it's also because it puts you in a perspective of not trying to punish or reach to conclusions immediately. Meaning, yes, biases are problematic or can be problematic, but we have to go back to that idea that we all are biased. And by the way, we all exhibit several biases all the time. The important part is to identify when they are produced and to try correct yourself. Now, I always like to use that idea of us, and this is something that is in common with what we discussed before, the individuals versus us as part of a group. What do I mean by that? Us as an individuals, the individuals are good, like they can think for themselves, they can reason, but when we are part of a group, strange things happen. And one of the main things that we tend to protect the behavior or behave in a way that is according to the group. Now, we're individuals and we have our own experiences and our own interpretations of events, mainly based on our own heuristics, meaning the things that we have inherited by all the experiences that we have. Remember that idea of heuristics, how we interpret things. Our experiences influence our heuristics, and also our heuristics influence the way in which we interpret our experiences. So again, if I have certain ways of seeing things based on my prior experiences, and I'm encountering a new experience, now I tend to compare that experience or those experiences of the past and the ideas that I have reached from those, and I tend to take those and compare it with the new situation, and based on that, I'm going to make an assessment, an assessment, or I'm going to think about something completely different, right? So we're more than just individuals. We always have said that we need people for our own survivals. We're social creatures and need others, again, to survive, as stated obviously in other videos, mainly in the in-group bias. And also, as I mentioned before, the pressure of being part of a group is so high. It is so important for us to be part of a group because, again, literally not being part of a group used to mean death or at least a detrimental loss of quality of life. That a lot of our behavior was developed to do whatever we need to not only belong to a group, but stay as part of the group. Now, as discussed also in the video of the in-group bias, we're influenced by our society, creating our own sense of identity based on different ideas: family, country, religion, politics as well, etc. And of course, our experiences and the conclusions that we reach based on them. So basically, it's a mix of, yes, I want to be part of a group, but also I have experiences. Those experiences shape the way in which I think, and I have to balance my way of thinking with the way of thinking of others because I also want to be part of a group because I don't want to lose the benefits of being part of the group. Now, why do we choose to be part of a particular group? That is a better question because there's no question about, yes, we need to be around other people, but why do we choose to be part of a particular group? We have a strong need to belong into a group. That is clear, as I always say, because again, of our limited capacity of survival. Now, this is just a coping mechanism we developed to try to survive our world. We have discussed this many times, from finding food to being able to find shelter or to being able to defend yourself or defend others. That is crucial for your survival. So if you don't have any of this covered, you obviously not only are going to suffer enormously, but you can actually literally die. So the first group of people that we are exposed to is our own family. And our own family actually covers all of these different things that I was discussing before. It covers the need for us to look for shelter. Obviously, our parents or the people who care about us in the beginning, they have a shelter for us, food, same thing. And then they can defend us against people who want to attack or people who want to harm us, right? So again, the first group of people that we are exposed to is our own family. And it is our family the source of our first identity, at least in the beginning. Now, as we grow up, obviously in our exposure to other groups, that starts to be shaped or being shaped or reshaped in different ways, especially because now we're becoming more and more familiar with all the type of groups. And especially if new groups appear to give a higher sense of security. Now, let me stop for a second. So let's say that you grew up in a family that made you feel unsafe for whatever reason. You might be a family, a son of a daughter of someone, an abusive parent, for example. And then all of a sudden you found a different group that treated you better. And then obviously that sense of security made you go into a different direction. Obviously certain values that you had or held to this point would change because obviously now there's a new group that will give you a better sense of security. But this is an extreme example. You don't have to be abused. Sometimes it's as easy as you have a particular view about life in general, and that doesn't fit the criteria of your parents. And as you grow up, you start looking for people who think the same way as you do. So naturally, you're reshaping your life or the way that you interpret things based on those new groups, not specifically your family. But keep in mind that your family, as the first source of identity that you have, is still highly influential on your behavior and the way that you perceive things. Now, we're still, again, highly influenced by our own first experiences with our families, and that is what makes it so hard sometimes to change and to accept certain other groups, because we are still kind of attached to those ideas or ideals that we inherit from our own families. And now, I just introduced that idea of coping mechanism, but it's not the only coping mechanism, or it's not the only thing that worries us. Like, it's not a life and death situation only. It's not uniquely attached to that idea. Sometimes we cope with other things that are not necessarily life and death, but as I said before, it can actually change your life, or it can make it more miserable, or the worst, we're attracted to certain people because we experience a higher sense of not only security, but self-realization. We feel much better with other people. They bring us more happiness. So again, it doesn't always have to be the negative is pushing us in one direction. The positive of the other group can actually form that attraction and make us move in a different direction. So there are different mechanisms, and those different mechanisms appear in general, partly depending on our capacity to fight back or not. So different coping mechanisms that appear in our lives, or they are formed, or they are created, or they are an answer to our capacity to fight. So if we have a capacity to fight back, meaning to fight back against what we consider the group, we will behave or we will cope in a different way than if we feel that we cannot fight back. So again, if we feel that we can fight back, we tend to stand our ground. We don't feel that threatened. We feel like, well, it doesn't really matter. I can say certain things that this group is not going to punish me so badly. So I feel comfortable with that. However, when we feel that we cannot fight back, when we feel that there are situations in which, or it's not specifically about situations, about the group that we're attached to, that we feel that we cannot fight back, that we cannot tell this group certain things because that would be contradictory with what the group thinks. What happens is that the consequences to do so will be so dire that we're not willing to pay the price. Then we tend to conform with the other or with other people's opinions and senses. So again, if we feel comfortable by saying certain things, we don't care, we don't feel that we are going to lose that much, we tend to stand our ground a little bit more. But when we feel that we're going to be punished, or that we might not have the emotional power to confront that, or we just don't want to do it because we're exhausted, that's when we tend to conform with other people's opinions and senses. Now, we all have experienced both sides. So it's not just like a person can just exclusively focus on one side. And it's actually important that we have to balance that. So it's not because one sounds like, oh, this is definitely better. Like, if you feel better, you can stand your ground all the time. That would be good. Not really, if that puts you in a spot in which no one wants to deal with you, because at the end of the day, you want to suffer the same consequence. So again, we always are a mix of both, right? So sometimes we are a little bit more assertive in the way that we say things, and sometimes we are a little bit less assertive because we interpret that we either don't have the power to fight back, or we just don't want to fight because we're exhausted. We don't have the mental power to do so. Now, some people have a harder time at disappointing others. Self-esteem and confidence play an important role in this behavior. Obviously, if your self-esteem is lower, your tendency to look for cues that will make you think that you're going to be expelled from the group are higher, meaning you're going to be looking for things that, I don't want to piss this person off, or I don't want to say this because I'm so afraid that I'm going to be alone and nobody's going to take me in, that I just can't do that. So obviously, the lower your self-esteem, the more prone you will be to be conforming with what the group thinks. Now, balancing assertiveness, with being part of a group is key to our success and our well-being, because, as I said before, obviously the opposite is not good either. So what happens if you're not assertive? Well, then you are going to be part of a group, but you're going to be extremely unhappy because you're going to be basically doing what other people want you to do all the time. So now, being too assertive can again drive people out of your life and drive them crazy, or can get you kicked out of a group. But the lack of assertiveness, can also make it for a very disappointing and unfulfilling life. Being assertive is possible only if we are not worried about our own survival. As I said before, if we feel like, well, I can say this to the group, I can say this. I'm going to give you an example. You're talking to a group of friends and you're not exposing an idea that seems to be different from your group. But if you feel, you know what, like, let me give you a more specific example about a politician in particular that they don't seem to like, but you seem to be okay, or even like him. But you think, well, if I say that, they will be surprised, but they're not going to criticize me that much. You probably are going to be more assertive because you don't fear to being out of the group. You fear that, well, maybe they're going to battle me. They're going to give me some trouble. We're going to argue for a little bit, but that's it. Now, for that reason, the support of the group is also crucial. What if you're part of a group that is not supportive of your behavior, if you think that they're always constantly criticizing, not only you, but you have seen that behavior in others. You have seen that behavior done to others. What if you have seen your group of friends criticizing, with the same example, other people for saying that they like certain politicians? What if that represented such a huge problem? Well, probably you're not going to open yourself up to that group because you don't want to be punished. So again, the support of your group is crucial, and that goes from both sides. That goes, you need to look for a group that is good for you, meaning a group that is willing to be accepting of your differences, and at the same time, the group needs to make that effort. So it's not only on you, it's in both sides. When looking for a group, again, part of our behavior is designed to find those traits in others that will make us feel safe. So that's why in the beginning, if, again, you have the luxury, if you have the choice, if you can actually choose between different groups, you're going to be looking for things that are convenient to you. And I'm going to stop right here because this is an important, crucial moment in this discussion. Not everyone has the same benefit. Not everyone is exposed to different groups. Some people are exposed to very few groups, and that can actually trigger them thinking, this is it. This is it for me. I don't have access to any other person or any other type of group, so I need to stick with this type of group because what else is it there for me? Like, obviously, I don't have access to other people, so I don't want to be alone. So obviously, there's some truth behind that, meaning, yes, you can be scared, and at the same time, that to be true, that can be harder for certain people to be accepted by a group of people that are different than them. That's true. But sometimes it's just out of fear, meaning if a person has a lower self-esteem, obviously when they approach the same problem, they're not going to be that picky, because the first thing they're going to think is, well, I would like to be part of a group that is more accepting of A, B, and C. But you know what? Like, I've seen so many problems in my life that I don't think I can even afford that. I can afford the people that I can afford around me, and that's all I'm willing to take. So obviously, that is not a very good take on the situation. It's not a good approach. But unfortunately, a lot of people, we all fall at some point in that, where sometimes our self-esteem is a little bit lower. So we tend to see the things from a different perspective. However, if our self-esteem is okay and we have choices, one of the first things that we do is that we're trying to look for, in the group, we're trying to look for these traits that will make us feel safe. Those traits in others are part of the group. So we're selecting among the group, oh, this person thinks like me in A, B, and C, but he's very radical in those things. And those things in particular, I'm very attached to it, so I don't want to deal with that person anymore. But then I have this other person, and that person has his own group. And it turns out like we're not okay, but at least in the things that are the most important and crucial for me, we're great in. So again, when looking for a group, we tend to do that. And when we don't have those, I mean, when we don't have those traits, or when we perceive that we are not, we don't have the support of the group, we might actually be more agreeable, just as a way to cope for the lack of support. This is an example of low self-esteem that I was talking about before. So it might be that as a way for me to cope with the fact that I don't, or I'm not being supported, I'm going to say, I'm going to attach to this person or to this group as much as I can, because this is it for me. I don't have anything else. And I'm afraid that even if I know in my heart of hearts that this is not great, I know that if I leave, probably it will take me a while, but I could find people that are better. I also feel like by leaving that, I don't know if I can cope with the fact that I'm going to be alone. Now, I wanted to emphasize that because I want you to realize how the psychological effect is so powerful that can drive not only our behaviors, but the people that we choose in one direction or the other one, just out of fear. Now, sometimes resentment can be built or can build over time. And if we find people who will show us support, we might jump to the other side or to their side, even if it's not completely opposite of us, and join their group, even if this group is perceived as a radical one. So this is an example again of you live in a society, or you live, in a particular neighborhood, for example. You have access to a certain amount of people, they tease you, they don't think like you, they actually are always laughing at you, but you feel like there's nothing you can do, right? That this has been life for you for a very long time, and you kind of accept it. And you start building resentment, but you don't say anything out of fear of getting kicked out of the group. And then what happens is one day, sometimes someone shows up and shows you a different way of seeing things, and then you're attracted to that person in that group, and you tend to move into the opposite direction. So I actually put a quote here, and maybe that's why the picture is this. And I said, don't be a Nate. And I'm talking about Ted Lasso's Nate. And if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, you probably are not going to understand this. But basically, there's a character that basically starts like being very unassertive, and it turns out that he does like 180 and turn out to be a bad person, not a bad person. You better watch it; you will understand better. Anyway, it all has to do with our sense of what is right and what is wrong. So all of these that we are discussing in terms of what is good and what is bad, what is it that makes me feel better, and what are the things that makes me feel worse, all of that has to do with our sense of what is right and what is wrong. And now, why is that important? Because that touches to a different portion, and this is the next slide that I'm going to talk about. I want to talk about the importance of justice. So again, that concept of what is right and what is wrong. Again, if I was brought up in a family, or I was part of a group that didn't treat me right, but I felt that that's the only thing that I got, and I built resentment, and all of a sudden I found a new group that treat me right, or treat me in a way that makes me feel better. Obviously, I'm going to shift. I'm going to move to the other one. So everything will change according to what I perceive to be good or I perceive to be bad. And sometimes we move from one group to the other one based on what we perceive to be right or wrong. So again, we're part of this group, and all of a sudden, even if this group has been okay, but sometimes groups change, right? So it's not necessarily that they have been harming me for a long time. I build resentment. It could be that that group of some people of that group changed, and now, it's completely opposite of how I felt before. Sometimes that can actually be driving a person to move to a different group or to try to look for a group that now is more in sync to what this person in particular think to be right. So now we form our sense of right and wrong according to the group or groups we have been part of. Mostly, as I said before, we start with our family, and then we go to school, then we grow up in a high school. All of those influences create that sense of what is right and what is wrong. And we're selecting and reshaping at the same time, and we're moving from groups and from one group to the other one. As we mentioned before, the first group we have experience with, our family, is highly influential in the way that we perceive the world. And that includes the way that we consider, or the things that we consider to be right and wrong. So when we perceive something to be wrong, we want that to make it. We want it to make it right. We want everything to be right. We want it, even if it's not us making it right. We want someone else to make it right. That is, sometimes we want people to be punished, and sometimes we want people to change their opinions. So sometimes we just want people to be punished because we perceive that someone did something so outrageous. We want people to go. There's a reason why we want people to go to jail. That's why a lot of people does go to jail. But also, in a different, especially in the social media era, sometimes we want to punish people, even if it's something that is not illegal, but we consider immoral. Like, for example, someone made an unfortunate joke. Could be sexist, could be a racist joke. We want that person, we don't feel bad if that person loses their job. So we want that person to be punished. But sometimes what we want is to have just an apology. And what sometimes we do is we try to do a little bit of both. We try that person to get punished and that person to repent. So it's not only about the person being punished. I want to make sure that this person will not think about this anymore. But this punishment is going to be so efficient and so effective that that person will not think about doing that twice. I'm going to stop here because that, first of all, is an infantile mentality. And I'm not talking about the person who makes the racist joke. That is obviously bad. I'm just talking about you wishing that the person is going to change his or her mind. That is very childish because a person's mind will take a long time. And you need to understand why. That person has lived their entire life, or his entire life, or her entire life, by saying those things that maybe were not condemned. Has been inappropriate, yes, of course, but maybe he was now confronted enough, right? So the first time that the person receives a punishment, or the second or the third, might not be the one that is sufficient. People change over time. However, and I'm going to flip, sometimes things can be so traumatic, like, for example, someone who loses their livelihood, and I'm not talking about only being fired, I'm talking about like being punished, outcast, nothing. That can be so efficient that sometimes I actually think that definitely can drive a person to changing their mind, or at least, if not changing their mind or not making those comments, not thinking that those comments are bad necessarily. It is true that the person will think twice about making similar comments in the future. But we also have to balance the punishment with the crime. So this idea of punishing others is important to maintain our sense of control. So if you remember, for everything that I've seen or I've said so far, in terms of our survival, understanding our surroundings, not feeling safe is what triggers everything else. So if all of a sudden we see other people misbehaving in a way that we don't deem to be right, and we don't seem to see any punishment, we're not going to feel well, because that is basically saying that you don't understand your surroundings, that you're lost, that you're wrong, that you don't have any control. So it's that sense of control that will actually create that idea of punishing others. the sensation that we understand our world and that when things don't go according to the way that we perceive to be right, that we have people to correct them. So we expect, again, when something like that, and again, it doesn't have to be like a horrible crime, it can be an inappropriate behavior. We want someone to be punished, meaning the person who did that to be punished. But we also want people to support that idea of punishment. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand, we wouldn't feel safe. That we are entitled somehow to ask for this correction to be done. And I'm going to make that distinction because we all have that idea of, well, this person should be punished, not for me only. It's nothing to do with me, but for the person that he did that to. So obviously, that is empathetic, and that is a good thing. But sometimes we go to the opposite extreme. We focus so much in ourselves that we feel that we are entitled to ask for this correction to be done. So again, it's not necessarily so much that we're thinking about the person that this was done to, I mean, the person who received that inappropriate behavior from this other person, but it's more of like that causes me so much damage, even if I was not a participant of that, but seeing that that had happened, even hearing that that had happened, that I feel entitled to ask for restitution, even if I was not part of that. So unfortunately, sometimes this idea has taken to extremes. Again, nothing necessarily wrong. As I said before, we all have that level of empathy in which we see this person doing that to someone else, and we think, I wouldn't like this to be me, and I don't like this to happen to that person. So obviously, I think that this person needs to be punished. But sometimes that idea gets taken to an extreme, and especially in this area of the social media, in which we now think that not only we're entitled, we are expecting that others are going to support the same level of punishment. Now, one other thing that I wanted to discuss that has to do with how, because everything that I have discussed so far has to do with how groupthink occur and why when something goes wrong, we want to look for the people around us, or we expect part of our tribe or the people who think like us to act or to support that idea or the same ideas that we have. All of that has to do with groupthink. And this has to do with what I'm about to discuss, have to do with groupthink, but it has to do with how sometimes that idea of being extreme or going to extreme has also an explanation, especially in today's world. It makes it easier for people to ask for others to be punished. That's the first thing. And it makes it easier for the people who ask others to be punished not to receive any direct consequences. What I mean by that is, like, I can ask for someone else to be fired, but hey, I don't want any backlash. I don't care about what you think. I'm in the right. I think that this behavior is wrong. This person needs to be fired. This person needs to be corrected. And this person needs to be, quote unquote, canceled. But I don't want anything. Nothing can happen to me. It shouldn't happen to me because I'm in the right? So the sense of, or that sense of, I will not be punished, meaning that certainty that you are in the right. You have found your tribe. You're expressing a thought. And it seems like it's working, right? It seems like other people are agreeing with you that that person, in this example, should be fired. That idea makes people behave in an extreme way because for the first time in history, you can communicate literally and virtually with anybody without facing any consequences of doing so. So in the past, if you approach anybody, let's talk about the extreme of a celebrity in the streets, and you said anything, that person can curse you back, can actually say terrible things to you, and you would just have to take it. So it was like, all right, you give, but you also would take something. Now this is becoming more and more easy for you to communicate a thought and to see how others are thinking the same way, and to also not receive any consequence because there's no one. The only thing is that person can write you back. But again, if you are in the right or you're perceiving to be in the right, you're not necessarily fearful of that because you feel that the majority will support you. To make matters worse, the feeling of being part of a tribe it might be or it might contribute to the feeling that even if I do get some criticism, again, even if I now receive the criticism from what I said about this other person, I always have the backing of these people who are my tribe. And for me, that's the most important thing, because those are the type of people that I see anyway. So those are the type of people that I base my sense of security on, my morals on, and therefore whatever they say is more important than whatever other people say. So as you see, you're starting to see how groupthink plays an important role in how you think about yourself as part of a group that is accepting of your behavior, and you're kind of ignoring what others say because they're not as important. Intentions are lost in the group. So I like a phrase, because this actually expresses better what I'm about to say. It's a Spanish phrase, and I want to say it in Spanish, and I'm going to translate. Is entre todos la mataron y ella sola se murió. That means between or among all of them, they kill her, but she died herself. So basically, it's a phrase that it means that, hey, I didn't really do much. Like, there's a bunch of people doing something, but she died herself. Like, I was not responsible for that, right? And it's precisely that idea of being part of the tribe that might contribute to the lack of remorse. Again, being part of a group that is doing things, you might not feel that bad for two reasons. One is like, if you think, well, I only did 0.5%, so I shouldn't be that bad, right? That is one thing, but also showing or being shown the support by other people or seeing in others that behavior might actually normalize that behavior, even if it's an extreme behavior. But you're not going to think that that is an extreme behavior because, again, your sense of normalcy is based on the group that you're part of. And the group, the very same group that you're basing everything on, is behaving similarly to you. So that idea that I'm not that guilty, that others did it too, the approval of the group, especially when confirmation bias is at play, again, remember, confirmation bias through that. I'm selecting the information based on the people that support my ideas anyway. So I'm basically not paying attention to anything else. It doesn't even exist. It doesn't even register. I'm actually confirming what I think, my preconceived ideas. I'm confirming that based on the group that I'm pre-selecting and what they are saying. So that idea, again, especially when confirmation bias is at play, might give the people who behave that way, meaning who are punishing others or who might be quick to judgment, the feeling that they might be right since the majority or their perceived majority, again, confirmation bias. They're selecting that idea, those people. So it's not truly the majority, but for them, that's the majority because that's the only thing that they have focused on. That's the only people that matters to them. The other people don't matter. And sometimes, especially because of social media, they don't even have access to other type of people. And the few that filters through are going to be such few number that you still have the sense of, oh, that those are just a minority. The group is with me because that is what I perceive. So again, the sense of that the majority perceive majority of people side with me or defend me. But what if the group wasn't there? What if you did something that you miscalculated? You thought for sure that you were going to punish someone. Think that for a second. Think for a second that someone that you deem not as a good person, that you think did something terrible, made an inappropriate joke, inappropriate behavior. What if you punish that person and all of a sudden, what if all the information and all the feedback you receive is bad against you? Nothing changed. The only thing that happens is like all of a sudden, the people who were supposed to defend you didn't say anything at all. And the only messages that you are receiving are from the other side. The people who think that you're wrong, that you are actually too wrong. And that's the only message that you receive. What if the group, again, wouldn't defend you? What if the group that is supposed to be there for you says nothing at all? Well, then not only we would be confronted with reality, but meaning reality that other people exist and the other people have a different behavior and a different thought, but we would feel lost. We would understand what's happening. We would think this is crazy. Like I've felt for sure people were going to side with me. Why aren't they siding with me? So it's interesting because the only thing that has changed is the feedback. The feedback of, in the first case scenario, you're being supported by the same people that you are selecting, and you don't question yourself at all. And the second case scenario, in which you're going to be confronted by this hypothetical group that is opposing to your views, that makes you think that you might be in the wrong, or at least that you don't understand what's happening. So again, everything will be based on the feedback that you receive. Now, the other thing that I wanted to touch, and I think is related to groupthink, is that idea of the dangers of not knowing your surroundings. So when all of a sudden we get a response, this is a excuse me, a continuation of that idea of not understanding what's going on, meaning having an opposite response to what you expected. So when all of a sudden we get a response we didn't expect, or worse, the opposite, as I was saying before, of what we expect. Imagine that this group of people now are criticizing you and say, hey, you went too far. That's not good, or that's of bad taste. So if you were confronted with an opposing idea, then we might feel, meaning if we did that, we might feel like we don't understand what is happening around us. And that would also trigger that idea of what else I might be wrong about. As I always say, the problem, and that is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to change our minds, is because it's not precisely about this only. It's not about me being wrong about one thing in particular. It's about what else am I wrong about? If I'm wrong about this, if I don't understand, and I clearly I was off about this, what else am I wrong about? So that is something so stressful for most of us that we are trying to avoid those ideas as much as we can. We're trying to avoid feeling that we don't understand our surroundings, that we are wrong, because that means that, hey, maybe I'm wrong about all the things, and that creates more anxiety. Now, that problem with that, again, feeling or not understanding our surroundings and the feeling of being lost can be detrimental for our quality of life, or worse, people can take advantage of it by exploiting that sense of loss, or to either attract you to their group or to distance yourself from other groups and to punish what they consider the others. I'm going to repeat that last because it's a little bit complex. So that idea of feeling lost, that idea of not understanding your surroundings, is exploited constantly by groups. So when you feel lost, when you feel like you don't understand, what is the first thing that you want to find? You want to find something that kicks you back into understanding your surroundings, into safety. So you're looking for safety by looking for people who will say, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Like, you were right, you were correct, right? So again, that can be exploited for groups to either attract you to their group or to distance yourself from other groups and to punish what they consider the others, what they consider the group of the others. So when you don't understand, when you're feeling lost again, you have the tendency to look for things that make you feel better. And especially important when you have received that feedback, something that you didn't understand, or you didn't expect, something that happened, and you still don't have an explanation as of why it happened the way that it happened. That feeling of anxiety, of not understanding what's going on, can trigger the opposite effect, meaning it can actually make you move in a different direction, trying to look for things that can give you that sense of security back. And that can be via other group trying to say to you, hey, I saw what you say, don't worry about it, it's not that bad. We think the same way as you did. And then you're easily now in a different group that is accepting of you, but definitely might actually be either not in sync with you, or might even be in sync with you, but have some extreme views and extreme behaviors. So now let me talk about the last point before we go into solutions, and that is a new problem that's called the social media. Now, we have discussed this at length before with the confirmation bias and how that affects the way that you perceive things, how now the algorithms have pre-selected the type of people and the type of knowledge that you perceive. So you have a skewed version of reality. But worse, you have the sense that that is the majority of people because that's the majority of things that you see. So social media is a new big problem. And I always like to start with that question of what if our brain is not ready for any of this or all of it? What if it's not ready for everything that we're encountering right now? All of these things that we're suffering right now, all of these constantly looking for information, for feedback, for opinions. What if we're not designed, if our brain is literally not capable of coping with that information? I want you to stop right there and to think about that, because we have gone very easily into social media without actually asking, and evolved in a way without asking if we actually can do it. What if our brain has that limitation? So what if, again, there are real limitations to our thinking in or our psyche, and that we're not even aware of, just because we have never been in a situation like this? What if this is just the first time in history that we are so exposed to so many points of view that we think that this is just an evolution, but we don't understand that in fact it's something that we can never go over? I'm not saying that we can't. I'm just saying that that is a good question to ask, because unfortunately, even great ideas can turn into a massive disasters if not understood and managed correctly. Lately, social media is coming under a microscope for many reasons, and some of them very negative, especially for all the information that seems to appear related to how social media has affected our lives, from claims to election fraud, mass manipulation, disinformation, mental health issues, focus and attention, etc. Despite all of these real concerns, no solutions have been proposed. Like nothing at all has been really done. It's more of the discussion about those things, if they're real or they're not, or in which way they're real, or which portion is the fault of social media, which is the environment. Now, what it seems to be true, regardless of the side you're on, and what it seems to be an agreement for most people, is the perception that people have on others. That seems to be an agreement that social media seems to contribute to polarization, to make people more biased, and to strengthen the bond of online groups. Now, whether you're in one side of the spectrum thinking that no one should be controlled or regulated at all, and that the governments, in fact, are overreaching, or you are on the other side of the spectrum thinking that there should be more regulations, that governments and social media companies and platforms are not doing enough. Again, whether you are in one side or the other one, the lack of agreement should be a proof on how early all of this is for us, like how early on we are, like how unprepared we are, because we cannot even agree in the basics for that. That should be evident. And if it's not evident, that's proof that we don't understand it yet, that we need some time to understand that. Now, possible solutions to all of this, and not only with groupthink, but the problem with social media, although that is a harder problem to tackle. Possible solutions, curiously, one of the most efficient ways to fight back is having strong social bonding. And I'm going to stop because it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, right? It sounds like you just said that the problem is that social media creates these groups, and these people now tend to think about that, and there is a problem with the group think. What I'm talking about is real social connections with people offline, meaning different groups that do different things. You can join a theater company and just do these a couple of times a week. You can join a martial arts group and train a couple of times as well. Having strong social bonds with different type of people can be extremely beneficial to look other people from different perspectives. So again, they're no longer an exception. They're no longer an isolated image that I have of what I perceive others to be. They're others, but I have now connections with them. Whether it is, I train with that guy. You know what? He is not a bad person, but he has extreme views in terms of politics, or he likes his, his sports team that I hate. Just the fact that you can have a connection with someone who is so opposing, again, outside of social media, and that's the conclusion. Those things, you need to share all the things other than typing and writing. That has to do more with, and again, maybe in the future I will do something about this, another video in which I will discuss the effect of non-verbal communication versus verbal communication and how that also affects, meaning the way in which when you're talking to someone, you're perceiving the non-verbal cues as well, at the same time, the verbal communication, and how written words can actually be misinterpreted. Obviously, all of that can be more polarization added to the mix, meaning it's more difficult for you to be objective if you're perceiving this person through the lens of something that has been written, that you probably are going to even misunderstand the message. So it is also important to build and have mechanisms to not go quickly to judge others, meaning you have to build in mechanisms that say, hey, I'm cutting myself, I'm judging this other person, I shouldn't. That is a bias. Like I'm not going to, well, not necessarily a bias. You can actually be right about the person. You can actually encounter behavior that's terrible, objectively bad, horrible, that person should be punished, but at least not to be quick at judging that, unless that is something so outrageous that is obviously something that person should be punished even by going to jail. Now, that is one part, but I wanted to continue that phrase of build mechanisms to not go quickly and judge others, and make sure that our social group does the same and keeps us from doing so, meaning keeps us in check. I always remember one thing, maybe I was lucky, but I have had this group of friends always, and even family members, that will not help me, will actually not contribute to my confirmation bias, because when I said something that they consider was wrong, they were the first one to say, hey, that's a stupid idea. What are you saying? What are you talking about? That's stupid. And they will confront you. It is good for you to have people who don't just let you run and let you just be all the time. It's good for them to say, hey, just, quit it. Like you're just being too judgmental. That is not good. Like that is not a good behavior. So again, it is important for you to build mechanisms out for yourself, but it's also good for you to have a group or being part of a group or selecting a group that also have similar mechanisms. Or maybe it could be you introducing that idea of, hey, can you check on me and make sure that I don't do this? And the next time, can you tell me in confidence? Now, avoid social media groups, and that's the last thing that I was going to say, as much as possible, and balance those, meaning the social media groups, with offline groups of people. So obviously, as I said before, nonverbal communication is crucial, but also even the environment, it is important. Not only the communication, the experiences you have with other people can be influenced by the location that you have, the food that you were eating, all the things that make everything way richer. So by just focusing on social media, you're just losing all of these things that are available to you, that not to your disposal only, but that your brain was trained to do and designed to do, which is interpret all of these things and put it into one experience and make it, again, as I said before, rich. So as usual, I always like to finish with this idea that those are the solutions, but try not to use these as a way for you to criticize others and as a way for you to punish others, but this should be a self-reflecting tool. Try to think about, but it is second nature, right? Like obviously every time we hear about this, and especially when we're talking about groupthink and in-group bias, the tendency is to share that with other people. And it is good for you to share information with other people, but not to say, hey, see, this is the way that you're behaving. But it's more for you to self-reflect and to say, hey, this is interesting for A, B, and C, and I have observed and I've caught myself at doing this as part of this group. Do you think I'm doing that? And maybe open a conversation about it. So as usual, don't use this as a way for you to punish others. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I see you in the next one.